Hello, and welcome to Two Peas in a Pod presents Patty Mac's Pulpit. As always, I'm your host, Patrick McCormick. Before we get into this week's gospel reading, which comes to us from Luke chapter 6, verses 39 through 45, I'm going to ask that you like and subscribe to the channel. Please like and subscribe. We are now officially in the release of these videos in which the date of that gospel reading is actually happening. So it's going to be cool to see real views in real time. I just dropped the backlog. We're already up to 200 plus views. I really appreciate you guys taking time. And it looks like there's an organic audience out there that's hungering for spiritual growth just like I am this year. With that, let's get into this gospel reading. Luke chapter 6, verses 39 through 45 goes as follows. And he spoke also to them, and he said, Can the blind lead the blind? Do they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his master, but everyone shall be perfect, if he be as his master. And why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but ignore the beam in your own? Or how can one say to the brother, Brother, let me pull that splinter out of your eye, when they cannot see the beam in their own? Hypocrite, cast first the beam out of your own eye, and then you shall most clearly see and be able to take out the splinter from your brother's. For there is no good tree that brings forth evil fruit, and there is no evil tree that brings forth good fruit. For every tree is known by its fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor from a bramble branch do they gather the grape. And as good men go out in treasure of his heart, they bring forth that which is good, and an evil man will bring out evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Again, I know we've talked about this, but this is a continuation of the Sermon on the Plain, which is specifically found in Luke's Gospel. And it's a really great insight for us today in 2025 to see the way in which Jesus Christ wants us to live. Now, this is a very famous passage. I won't call it a parable because it's not a parable, but a very famous passage. It's one that's quoted a lot by both Catholics and folks that do not believe in the Christian faith in debates. And it's the famous expression of, why are you really bothering me with my sin? Are you blind to what you're doing as well? We're all guilty of things here on this earth. Don't look at the splinter in my eye. Look at the beam in yours, right? Or as Jesus does, he's flipping it here with us being the individuals with the beam in our eyes and our brothers having the splinter in theirs. So is the message here today, don't worry about your brother's sin. Just make sure that you take care of yourself? I'd argue no. What Jesus is clearly saying here when you go into the middle of this passage is that in order to be able to better remove sin from your brother, you need to take care of your house first. Essentially, remove the beam from your eye first so that you may remove the splinter from others. Now, Jesus understands with human nature and it being fallen, we will never ever attain perfection. It's impossible. We are unfortunately ordered to desire sin. Well, actually, we're ordered to the good. Because of the fall, we desire sin. Jesus understands this. He had both a fully human and fully divine nature. It's one of the greatest things about being a Catholic, being a Christian, is that our God so humbled himself that he took the personage of an individual here on earth, right? Actually became flesh, was birthed, lived, ate, drank, died, and then was resurrected here. And he understands the importance of this passage. And I think that this is one that has stood the test of time because it's easy to fall into. It's easy for us to look and say, I'm not as bad as that guy or gal. Thank goodness, I'm good to go. And Jesus here is specifically warning against that. Let's go into a couple of examples here. So, first, look inward, fix yourself. And I think that's something that both the detractors from this story that like to utilize this against Catholics and Christians that preach the gospel and Catholics and Christians that actively try to live this way get correct. You have to fix your own home first. I need to take care of the sins that burden me and that I'm unfortunately desiring to do to break my relationship with Christ before I can go out and evangelize the whole world. With that being said, I'm never going to be perfect. Therefore, I must get my house in order and thank God we have the sacrament of confession, right? So I can get my house in order, and then I can explain through witnessing my faith, which is living my faith, requiring an action, right, after that initial salvation. In order to remain in communion with Christ, it requires action from me. It requires me to do things, to live a certain way, and to change my lifestyle away from sin and towards the sacrament, towards the good. And again, this is what's required of us, and this is incredibly important. So, a couple of lessons. First, obviously, fix yourself. Second, fix your brother. And I understand it's confusing because when you read the first part of this, you go, don't worry about the splinter in your brother's eye when you got a beam in your own. But immediately after that, it clearly states once the beam is out of your eye, you are better equipped and better fit to remove the splinter from your brother's. So, what does that mean? Well, I always like to go through really three, but two gospel authors, three different readings that kind of explain this. So let's go to Matthew first. And what Matthew states here is that there's a Pharisee, and he's praying in the temple, and he looks over and he sees a poor individual that's wretched, full of guilt, full of sin. And he looks at Christ, or well, in this case, he looks up to Yahweh, looks up to his understanding of what God is at the time. And he says, thank goodness you didn't make me like him. And the Pharisee is actually condemned because he doesn't recognize the sin in himself. He doesn't have a mirror. He has no self-reflection. He can point out the sin in the individual over there that's below him, according to him, but he doesn't understand that he himself is not exactly living a good, if not perfect, lifestyle. And again, Jesus utilizes this story to condemn that Pharisee. So when we get up on our high horse and we go, look at all the great things I'm doing, it's very easy to be humbled and to remember that we are not. We are not perfect. We unfortunately are desiring sin. Until we completely wipe that out, we should not ask for any sort of glory. We should not boast, right? We do not deserve salvation. It is through grace that salvation is offered. And it's up to us, once that offering is accepted, to change our lives, to stay in communion and stay with that gift. But then we have Matthew again. And Matthew turns around and he has a really interesting story where Jesus is approached by a group of people and they ask him, master, teacher, if I have an argument with my brother, with my neighbor, what should I do? And Jesus explains to them, first go to your brother. Go to the individual with whom you have the complaint. If you cannot handle it one-on-one directly, then turn to an arbiter, the arbiter, of course, being the church. So Jesus is directly telling us we do not need to look to these, individuals that have a position of authority in the church to rectify or to call out or to correct sin. Jesus is telling us right here, if there's an issue with your brother, with your neighbor, if they have an issue with you, talk directly amongst each other. So if you have a family member, if you have a friend who is not doing the right things and living with sin, it is okay. In fact, it is asked by Christ and required by Christ to have that tough conversation with them. Now, do it in a loving, charitable, professional way. Again, do not ignore the sins of yourself. Do not ignore the beam in your eye when you're calling out the splinter in your brothers. But again, not every argument, everything has to come down to getting the magisterium involved, getting a priest involved, a bishop involved, a deacon involved. It's okay to have these conversations, even though we are not perfect. Some of us may have venial sins on our soul. In fact, if you haven't been to confession, you have a mortal sin on your soul. You're still required by Christ to go to your brother directly and explain what is bothering you, what's ailing them, and how to correct that action. Christ gives us that power to do it. And then finally, let's go to Luke. And Luke states that it's important that we rebuke the sin, but love the sinner. And again, if you look at a majority of church fathers, they probably had a quote similar to this, but it comes directly from Luke. Rebuke the sin, hate the sin, but love the sinner. And Jesus exemplifies this multiple times throughout the Gospels, right? When he stands in front of the prostitute and he states, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And all the townspeople walk away. Christ turns around to the prostitute and doesn't say, keep prostituting, keep selling yourself. He says, go and sin no more, change your ways. When Jesus makes and has a relationship with Mary Magdalene is no longer selling herself and doing sexual work. Mary Magdalene has had a conversion and therefore a change of action, which allows for her to be one of Jesus' disciples, one of Jesus' followers. When Simon Peter is going out onto the beachfront and giving Jesus his boat. And he's been fishing all day and he's caught nothing. And Jesus says, "Put down your net, Simon." Simon has to do an action to remain within communion with Jesus, to remain a disciple, to remain one of the first apostles and the first bishop of Rome and the first pope and the first in the apostolic succession line. It requires action, it requires a change to rebuke sin, to rebuke doubt, but to still love the sinner. Because, spoiler alert, if you've been listening to this series, you know that we're all sinners, to include the person right here in the camera talking to you. We are all sinners. We fall far short of the glory of God, of salvation, but it is important for us to do our best to go out there and to explain to people the good news, what we must do in order to be cleansed of this sin, whether it is baptism at the start of our conversion or it's confession after we have been baptized with that indelible mark but still sin, going to confession to clean the soul, to cleanse the soul, to purge the soul, and then obviously at death, either, well, hopefully one of the two best options, going to purgatory for further purge or going directly into heaven, which of course is the desired state, perfection, things that we just can't even wrap our heads around right now with how great that is. So with that, it is important to understand the message of this story here. When Christ utilizes the word hypocrite, he's utilizing that for folks that continue to do the action, knowing that it is wrong, but going out there and preaching that the people should be doing something different. A hypocrite is not an individual, for example, as Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas likes to bring up, the meth addict that has gotten over meth and is now going to schools to explain the dangers of meth. That's somebody who should be commended, not condemned. The porn addict who figures out a way to get over the porn addiction and then goes out and speaks about the evils of porn addiction is not a hypocrite. That is a person that you should be commending for being able to get over that and explain the dangers of that sin. A hypocrite here is a person who's still doing meth and explain why meth is bad, or a person that's watching porn and explain why porn is bad. That is what Jesus is talking about when he states you have a beam in your own eye and a splinter in your brother's, and yet you're lecturing him. It makes no sense. So, if you've fallen privy to, or if you've fallen to sin, and you found a way to get over it, or you're actively fighting against it, and you continue to preach the good news and why that sin is bad, you're not a hypocrite. Jesus is not condoning you. That is exactly what you should be doing. So don't miss the message of this gospel, which is one, if you remember last week, God is merciful. We're called to be merciful. And two, when you see sin, rebuke sin, but continue to love the sinner. Continue to love the creation of God. Because if we read Genesis and we know Genesis, everything God created is good. Thank you very much for joining us here for this week on Patty Mac's Pulpit. Really appreciate it. Again, it's cool to be here live with y'all. This is the week of March 2nd. We have the March 2nd gospel. So we're really doing this in real time now. Please utilize that comment section. Feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. In addition to all your weekly tasks, which includes going to Mass, going to confession, liking and subscribing to Patty Mac's Pulpit, please, please, please remember as we get ready to enter this Lenten season to have some sort of devotion or something that you are sacrificing for God. And what my wife and I are going to be doing this year, and feel free to join us virtually, call us, text us if you know us personally, utilize the comment section if you'd like to get to know us and join us in this. We're going to be doing a daily rosary. So we do a good job of doing novenas sporadically throughout the year, but we're going to do a daily rosary, the two of us with our son, for the entirety of Lent, plus a couple additional days to get the full novena in. But we have our own private intentions, but obviously one that is important this Lenten season is, for the soul of Pope Francis, who is unfortunately looking at this time, with the information I have, medically worse and worse. So it's important to pray for the Holy Father. If we do end up getting a new pope, obviously I hope that decision is inspired by the Holy Spirit, which we know always is, that the new pope brings the Catholic Church out more into the world so we continue to convert souls, save souls, and earn their salvation. And of course, I don't mean earn like a checklist. I mean actually earn in the way that the Gospels explain that salvation is earned. Thank you very much for some of your time, and I look forward to seeing you next week right here.